A very, very warm welcome to a very full room in St John Street, and to the even larger group that we've got who've joined us virtually. Very sorry to have kept you waiting. We've had one of our lifts has been malfunctioning, so it's been a bit slower to get everybody into the building and into the room. And in line with the theme of this afternoon, I should say my name first, Josh Hillman, Director of Education at the Nuffield Foundation. In line with the theme of the afternoon, we're hoping that our approach to technology will enable the experience of those online to be as good a substitute for the in-person extravaganza as we have here, and indeed that your participation enhances the event for all of us, wherever we are. We have a dedicated technical support person, Zoe, on Teams, who will be monitoring the audio and camera feed. So since there's so many of you, cameras and mics have been turned off and the event's being recorded. For those of us who are here, the toilets are on either side of the lifts. Please use that door at the back if you need to exit the room. And we aren't expecting any fire alarms. So if one goes off, please quickly leave by the nearest exit and follow our staff who will direct you to where you should go. Hopefully it won't happen. Now, just to give you a bit of a sense of the structure for the afternoon, I'm going to be framing our work in this area, explaining how we got into this, why we got into it, what the purposes of the report and our longer term programme of work are, and indeed of the afternoon. And then I'm going to talk for a bit about my take on the relevant context of educational policy and practice and research that makes this so significant. Then my colleague Renata will outline the key findings and implications that come out of the report, acting as an aid memoir for all of those of you who've been poring over the report since we sent it in advance in a week ago, and a cheat sheet for those of you who didn't have time. Now, then we'll move into a panel session, which is being chaired by John Thornhill from the Financial Times, where we'll hear brief reactions from three experts, giving perspectives from policy, from teaching and school leadership, and from EdTech itself. I'll leave John to introduce them and then facilitate their initial discussion, and then we'll open up the wider conversation, bringing in questions and comments from both those in the room and those who are participating remotely. And wherever you are, please, if you could save your questions for that period of the session, then we're going to open up the audience remote participation question and answer box. So have your questions ready if you're online, and put them in at that point. I've rather rashly volunteered to field those questions and choose and try and synthesize them if there's quite a few of them. If you're in a room, you'll need to wait for the microphone, please, before you ask your question, so that the people who are online can hear you clearly. Finally, then I'll come back briefly at the end to outline a few next steps that we'll be taking in this area of work, no doubt partly informed by the discussion. We've got a slightly flexible endpoint. We said to everyone till 4 in advance, but now we've said 3:45 here, just to allow us a bit of wiggle room depending on how the conversation's going. And I doubt anyone here needs persuading of the importance of the topic that we're talking about and the issues that we've chosen to focus within it. Recent and rapid advancements in AI, the digitization of brain-based processes, may be poised to bring about quite profound changes across large sectors of the economy and the labour market, public services and other aspects of human life. And there are live debates regarding the pace and magnitude of those changes, given our almost inevitable tendency to overestimate short-term shifts while underestimating long-term effects. And the discussion around education in AI has been quite distinctive. As always with technology and education, it's been quite hard to separate the reality and the rhetoric. On the one hand, the pace of technological innovation and adoption in education has been traditionally slower compared to many other fields. Systems and policies tend to prioritize universal access to education and standardized entitlement. Before AI, as we know it, was on the scene, various waves of computer and web-based educational technologies, certainly as long as I can remember, and that's I'm getting on now, have promised increasingly efficient access to a whole wealth of content, knowledge, interactive learning, and have blurred the lines between formal and informal learning, and have fundamentally, or said that they would fundamentally alter the role of teachers and even of schools. And however, despite the sort of policy busyness in the area of educational technology, there have been major challenges in implementation of large-scale central government intervention. Significant investments from both government and from educational institutions have yielded underwhelming outcomes in terms of impact on achievement and learning. And it could be said that classrooms have maybe changed less than other spheres of life over that period. On the other hand, in particular with generative AI, it could be argued that its impact on education could potentially be of more significance than in other sectors, given that content, and in particular the written word, lie at the core of educational endeavour. Now, while it's still in its early stages, the ability of generative AI to interact with and adapt to learners' needs and to mediate the human-computer interface is certainly not something we can ignore. Whether or not it's revolutionary, whether or not we're at a critical juncture, as some would lead us to believe, that's all up for debate. I'm sure it will be talked about today. The policy-making apparatus is not well equipped to address these issues. I mean, DfE is understandably dominated by immediate and large-scale challenges around funding, workforce, governance issues. It lacks adequate foresight and horizon scanning functionality, and its in-house edtech team does a valiant job and brings in specialist secondees, but it would be interesting to hear Bridie's view on this, but it feels underpowered given some of the issues that we're talking about. The sort of strategic body that might be required, though it would need to be fundamentally repurposed, was something like the arm's length agency Vector that turned to smoke in the bonfire of the Quangos in 2010, as we remind readers in the report. There are also limits to leadership coming from quite a fragmented school system, as even the largest multi-academy trusts would acknowledge. And as for research, pointing the fingers at ourselves, I think we, like our applicants and our grant holders, have struggled through our normal grant giving processes to play a role in the improvement of evidence on edtech, let alone AI. Since whilst the type of work that we generally fund is geared towards policy making and practitioners, it tends to be focused on data, on practices and cohorts from children and young people from past and the ever disappearing present, and not looking ahead. That's just a function of the research methods. That's why we decided to do some ground clearing of issues and of terminology, as Renata will talk about, put some stakes down and exercise, to use the hackneyed phrase, some thought leadership. We're very lucky to have the Ada Lovelace Institute, an independent research institute, which we host, that has a mission to ensure data and AI work for people in society, and was willing, as part of its program of work on public services, to do a deep dive into education, working with us. So we all work together downstairs, so it's a bit like a kind of marriage between flatmates, but that's been the way we've worked. It's Nuffield Foundation and Ada Lovelace Institute collaborating on this project, and many people in both organisations have been involved in that, and also outside. We've consulted quite a lot with people, including with government. But I would like to pay special tribute to Renata Sampson and also Krukai Potong, who's not here today, who was on secondment from our LSE, who've worked primarily on this project. Few things about coverage and timing. We mainly cover schools and school-aged children. We touch on other parts of the UK, but I'm afraid it's pretty England-focused. And the idea of doing the project came shortly before OpenAI launched ChatGPT. And during the initial research, we were still trying to understand how this new type of AI might interact with and augment EdTech. So it was sort of work in progress. It's also important to mention that as we've gone along with this work and ideas have developed, we've been feeding into the policy process through meetings, attending events, responding to consultations, and really great to see that the DFE have a lot of what it's currently doing aligns well with our recommendations in the report. Before we get into the key findings of the work, I do want to spend some time framing these from Nuffield's point of view. Our starting point is not what AI, or more broadly EdTech, can do and how do we react to or exploit that. Interesting as that might be, and glad people are asking that question. But instead, what are the big challenges in education? What are we trying to achieve? And how might AI and EdTech more broadly address these? And I'm going to run through 6 issues that I think I suspect will come up in various ways this afternoon. The first, rhetoric around AI in general, rather than in education provision, suggests that it has this huge potential to enhance human capabilities and drive individual and collective productivity and free time for people's flourishing and well-being. Whatever the extent and timing of whether the reality matches that rhetoric, it would seem strange at the time of a DFE review of the curriculum not to ask the questions about whether that needs rethinking in line with this, and whether post-compulsory education and training and lifelong learning as well also need rethinking in terms of content, pedagogy, assessment methods, qualifications, and other credentials. And as AI automates tasks and makes content more accessible, does the value of human skills that are uniquely human become paramount? I think the answer is yes. And these include the sort of core or essential skills that are being explored by one of Nuffield's biggest projects, Skills Imperative 2035, which is identifying those core skills, assessing the supply and demand for them in the coming years and their implications for education. So we're talking about problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, interpersonal communication and collaboration. And to those we might add character attributes like autonomy and self-discipline, adaptability in the face of uncertainty, empathy, sensitivity to differences in cultural background, curiosity, all those sorts of areas that maybe the education system will start to privilege more in a world where other aspects are being delivered better by technology. Secondly, that's about the learner. What about the teacher? Nuffield has supported a significant body of work looking at teaching quality and the challenges of ensuring a qualified, a decent quantity of qualified and specialist staff. Workload and time use are clearly central to that, and AI does hold the promise of relinquishing some routine tasks such that flesh and blood teachers can focus more on things that only flesh and blood teachers can do. So not displacing their activity, not displacing their role, but enhancing it. And key areas of application include lesson design, planning and preparation, tailoring work for individuals, groups and whole classes, assessing progress, and allowing teachers to spend more time equipping students with problem-solving tools, engaging with them at a more sort of relational level, and addressing issues like motivation and study practices. The pursuit of personalization long predates digital technology, and it aims to counteract mass education's tendency to cater for the average individual's needs in terms of content, learning style, pace, age, stage, assessment methods, and so on. This applies to all learners, but may be particularly valuable in the context of the growing identification of overlapping categories of special educational needs and neurodiversity, and the learning needs that are often complex and fine-grained in that through that assessment. More individualized learning was always a core promise of EdTech, leveraging its potential to capitalize on richer or more finely tuned content, real-time interaction, and in some cases gamification. And AI is heralded as a game changer in this respect, with its claim that it can reshape how children learn and are formatively assessed. That's with feedback as they go along, utilizing the wealth of untapped learning data to cater to their individual strengths and weaknesses and provide deeper interactive learning in areas that need particular improvement. Again, all to play for, and a discussion to be had about the extent to which that is being fulfilled by current waves of the products on the market. Obviously, a major issue for Nuffield and for government and many others is the gaps in attainment and associated longer-term outcomes between different groups of children and young people, particularly by socioeconomic background. While there had been some progress in the prior couple of decades in narrowing those gaps, since 2019, it has widened, exacerbated by COVID. And there's a big question about the net effect of EdTech and of emerging AI on that equation. On the one hand, it can potentially be implemented in a way that equalizes access to personalized learning and the best resources and the best teaching. On the other hand, it might accentuate the gap because of the digital divide in access to the technologies or in digital literacy, and the dangers of a Matthew effect scenario in which well-equipped schools and families have access to more sophisticated or premium forms of provision, while others use more basic alternatives and yet remain less able to provide the enrichment away from the screen. All of this, of course, assumes positive effects on learning outcomes, which brings us on to the question around effectiveness and evidence. One of the most positive developments in the past decade or two has been the greater focus on evidence-based practice, particularly with the work of the Education Endowment Foundation on large-scale trials and their toolkit that enables schools to assess and select rigorously tested programs and approaches. Despite its prominence, evidence base for effectiveness of EdTech has been relatively weak. Few programs have undergone rigorous or independently evaluated trials. Most claims in terms of learning gains, even those that are sometimes presented as scientific evidence, have been unverified, and they've come in the form of marketing materials from the companies themselves, usually using data collected direct from users. Now, applications of AI in education, particularly generative AI, are developing at such a rapid pace that it's really hard to see how established methodologies for evaluation could be brought to bear in the required timescale. So that leaves the question, are all bets off because we're moving so fast, or do we need new, lighter touch and more rapid approaches to evaluation? We think we do, and one of the reasons for this project is to open up discussion amongst researchers to see if we can move more quickly towards that. And then just finally, policymakers and policy researchers that we fund are rightly concerned with questions around governance and accountability in the school system, where policy changes, whatever your view is on their net benefits, have certainly led to a more fragmented system. And given the complexity of the issues that we're discussing and the further increase in commercial interest in publicly funded education and the risks associated with developing and using AI and other data-driven technologies in education, we do think we need to look hard at who's responsible for assessing and mitigating those risks, where decisions are made, and whether we've got the right levers at central government level or in the layers that sit between central government and the classroom. On which note, I'm going to hand over to Renata to talk about the report and the key findings that are addressed in that kind of context.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh. How lovely to see you all. Thank you for coming. I'm Renata Sampson. As Josh has explained and introduced me, I work at the Ada Lovelace Institute and as with the Nuffield Foundation. I'm very pleased to get to present the report to you today. So hopefully you've received it. Maybe you've read some of it. Maybe you've read all of it. And if so, you can fill in the gaps that I'm going to miss. But let me give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through a landscape, a learning curve, a landscape review of AI and education in the UK. So yeah, there's a variety of things that this report seeks to do. We seek to explain what is AI. We seek to explain what the key issues about AI are. We talk about the current uses of AI within education in the UK. We talk about the issue and the importance of oversight and evaluation. And we outline some areas of future research that hopefully some of you in the room and online will be able to offer some support in doing. The paper basically is for everyone, but it's really for teachers, it's for school leaders, it's for those who are decision makers, policy makers, innovators, and as I say, anyone interested in AI technology and education. So the AI landscape, well, I have to say this one's been challenging. As Josh said, the report was initially conceived before the launch of ChatGPT in November 2022. We've been on quite a learning journey, a learning curve indeed, about what we're talking about when we talk about AI. And whilst there's a lot of chat in education about generative AI, actually it's bigger than that, it's broader than that. It's not just the opportunity to generate new outcomes, which is what generative AI does. It's narrow AI, which is specific. It's been around us for quite a long time. We used to just refer to it as data-driven technology, but actually it's a form of AI. It's a specific AI set to do a specific task, trained on vast amounts of very specific data. Lots of products already use narrow AI, and I'll try to come to some of those in the course of this presentation. Generative AI, the bit that we're all so excited about, the ChatGPT and others, that's a specific form of general purpose AI. General purpose AI is the foundation. It's often referred to as a foundation model. From general purpose AI, generative AI comes, and it's a broader than narrow AI, but it has a very specific role in that it's to generate a new output, whether that's text, whether that's video or audio or image. We talk a lot about generative AI, but what we really want to land in this paper is its actual general purpose AI that we should be thinking about. It's bigger, it's broader, it has different challenges to it, and it's likely that that's going to be what a lot of people who will be building new tech in the education space will be working on. So we hope that's helpful. So we started to just understand it's a landscape review. Where is AI being used already in schools? And we looked across the board at learning, at special educational needs, at teaching and administration. And yeah, AI, narrow AI predominantly, is in use across all of these areas. It's a feature of intelligent tutors, and I don't specifically mean personalized learning, but though it is used for some personalized learning tools, such as homework tools. A decision tree may be undertaken on understanding a pupil's learning already, their knowledge. And from that, certain quizzes or homework assignments can be directed to them in a personalized way, though it's likely many pupils will be receiving the same outputs. In special educational needs, it's not specifically special educational needs technology, but AI is in use in a lot of adaptive technologies and assistive technologies. And biometrics is also in play. Eye gaze, eye tracking, facial recognition, a variety of different biometric technologies that I will come back to shortly. With teaching, classroom management systems have narrow AI in them. Lots of tools to support teachers have narrow AI, specific uses in them. And with administration, it's massive. Management information systems, predictive analytics. This is all some form of narrow AI. So what are the opportunities then and the expectations for general purpose or generative AI in education if narrow AI is already so prominent? Well, we know that it's in a lot of informal use is already happening. And that's the prominent area of generative or general purpose AI in this space. It's access to ChatGPT. It's access to Microsoft Copilot or Google or Canva or various other visual generative AI tools. Pupils are using them to support them with their homework and assignments. Teachers, we know, are using them for lesson planning, for some forms of feedback and assessment and marking, proofreading, research, supporting pupils with special educational needs, translating documents, summarizing articles, books, or videos so that they can use them in the classroom. And with regards to administration, forgive me, with regards to administration, it's a critical tool for helping to send emails, for helping to summarize reports, and for drafting various different parts of text. In terms of very specific educational AI, EdTech AI, using generative AI, that's really nascent, and I'm sure everybody in the room knows that. At present, the informal use is on technologies that aren't specifically for education. They are general purpose, general access AI. So there's a risk attached to that, which I'll come to. But the very specific educational focused AI tools, they're nascent. We know of Khanmigo in the US. Oak National Academy have developed and launched a specific teaching tool, and various other startups are beginning to experiment with marking and assessment tools, with further teacher support, with teacher training products. There is a lot to play. There is a lot out there to play for, but whether or not it's going to achieve what we all want it to achieve is really still a question mark. So, being circumspect about these technologies is pretty important. It's really important for us to understand that there are challenges, and a lot of these challenges are long-standing issues with regards to the data that's being collected, where it's coming from, how clean it is, how accurate it is, whether or not there's bias in the data sets is really important, particularly if you're using technology to make a decision about a child, to determine somebody's pathway, to assess where their knowledge is and where their direction of travel is going to be. The security of the data is massively important. Schools are data controllers. They have data protection duties, but that can often be a challenge when you've got 1,000,001 other things you have to be dealing with. So understanding the privacy and security is critical, particularly when we get into AI systems. I speak about accuracy of representation of the data. Forgive me, I also am utterly inept at being able to scroll through my slides. And also to think about the challenges we have with transparency. There is always a challenge with any sort of AI system. The black box issue means that you cannot see how a decision is being made. You can see the data going in, you can see the data coming out, but you don't understand what's happened in the middle. Now, there are long-standing issues with regards to data and narrow AI. But with generative AI, we have greater challenges, newer challenges, unique challenges, some of which Josh outlined. The issues of autonomy, the issues of how you can be a teacher, how you can teach a class, how you can learn to be a teacher, how you can support children around you without necessarily being told how to do it by a system. The opportunities for a child to be able to learn and develop without necessarily being directed across into one pathway, but to have the opportunity of serendipity maybe, or to experience their learning naturally. The issue with relationships, whilst feedback may be able to be unbiased if it was to be generated by an AI, the importance of feedback between individuals is critical. Josh spoke a little bit about the human relationship. And we know that that's an issue for teachers, and we also know that that's an issue for pupils too. These are unique general purpose AI challenges that we need to be considerate of and think more about. So this is why oversight and evaluation really matters. And as Josh mentioned, the report looks at the past, the present, and the future of oversight and evaluation. So in terms of the past, Josh mentioned Bechter, and yeah, that's Bechter played an incredibly important role in being able to assess technology before it went into schools. At the present time, there is an awful lot of support from DFE and others for schools to be able to procure predominantly the technologies that they need to have, management information systems in particular. These are schools' statutory responsibilities. But it's very unclear what oversight, who is doing the oversight and evaluation. And none of it, as we understand, is particularly standardized. So we don't know quite how rigorous the testing is. With regards to the future, we outline the fact that we think that this should be a holistic approach. We really do need to understand what the technologies are doing. So some of the points I've already raised about privacy, security, cleanliness of data, and so on, but also the pedagogy that the technologies are being built on or are seeking to amplify. Are they doing what we really need them to do? Are they effective? Are they efficient? Are they guaranteed to improve outcomes for pupils? So tech evaluation, pedagogical evaluation, but also the evaluation of society, of the outcomes, of how it's affecting pupils, of whether that actually is broad and can be acknowledged or across the spectrum, or whether it's unique depending on place or circumstance or disadvantage in certain areas. We need to be able to assure that if technology and AI is going to become a more integral part of schools, that it's appropriate, that its use is appropriate, that it's fit for purpose, that we're not using technologies that are built on data sets that are literally scraped from everywhere, but that is focused very much on education, UK education, and what pupils need and what teachers need. And we also need to ensure that it doesn't embed or perpetuate existing inequalities or discrimination. So there are a lot of challenges about oversight and evaluation that we go into the report in terms of being able to access the technologies, being able to access the data that they've been trained on, being able to potentially do RCT trials, to consider the need to get a product out, but also the need to make sure that that product is going to do what we need it to do. That's a huge tension right now. We're all looking for innovation and growth, but we also need to make sure that innovation and growth comes from products that are actually fit for purpose and will support our children going forward. So what are the key findings? Well, at present, we are very much in a hype-hope space. We all want this to work. We all can sit and talk about all the things that we think it's going to do. Amazing personalized learning, massive support to teachers, taking away the pain of just how little time everybody has, enabling administration teams to be able to really see everything that a pupil needs and what their direction of travel is going to be. But is that actually achievable? And what are the challenges that will come to that? So hype, yes. Hope, yes. But let's see if it can actually manifest properly. As I say, it's not just about generative AI. I really enjoy talking about generative AI, but it's about general purpose AI. It's about all the other things, not just generating outcomes. It's about predictive analytics. It's about biometrics. It's about ensuring that a tool like biometrics is only deployed when it is scientifically proven, not just an idea that we can be able to determine whether or not a child is concentrating because of some form of eye scanning technology, for example. We also find, and as I've outlined, that most of the accessible AI that people are using right now is not education focused, and that is really important. It is built predominantly on unsuitable data. It has an impact on pupils in terms of, do they have the skill set yet to be able to acknowledge or identify whether the information they're being shown is accurate or not? And similarly with teachers, whilst taking away the pain of some of the time pressures, is there a time pressure on being able to assess that the outcome that you're being shown for a class, for example, for a lesson, is also accurate? Like, where's the time trade-off there? Also, very interestingly, I think teachers are, there's been some interesting research come through that teachers are curious about when a teacher should use it on their journey. A newly trained teacher needs to find their feet in the classroom. Is AI going to support that or potentially undermine that? When on a teacher's journey should AI be being used? We talk about education-specific AI edtech being nascent, as I mentioned, Oak National Academy, various others. But yeah, we've got a long way to go. We're looking forward to seeing it happen. I'm aware of the content store may be something that helps to generate education-specific AI, and I hope that people in the room will engage with that and make sure it does what we need it to do. There are clear opportunities, but as I've outlined, there are challenges, and some of these challenges are long-standing. The data issue is a long-standing problem. Getting it right is difficult. Sometimes we might have to say, this is too challenging, that the outcome, the opportunities from it isn't going to actually do what we need it to do, that the outcomes are going to be more problematic. So where do we draw the line on saying, actually, no, let's stop. Let's think about where there's a really good use of it. And if there's a slightly woolly use of it, maybe we need to step away. Regulation and governance has not kept pace. We know that. teachers and those building EdTech have a certain number of regulations and legislation that they have to adhere to, but it's nowhere near enough. We know that there is no current AI legislation, though it may be coming in time, but that's a challenging area. So we do have to acknowledge that whilst we can try and adhere to what is already out there, there is more that needs to be looked at, and the unique challenges really do need to be considered seriously. More support is needed. It's great that teachers and schools get support in terms of procuring certain types of AI. But if we're going to be pushing forward on learning and teaching AI, that has no support whatsoever and no oversight or evaluation of that. And because the evidence is limited, as Josh said, there is plenty of research being done, or so we hear, but how do we find it? How do teachers and schools know that that's out there? How do parents and pupils know about the evidence? In order to be able to build good support, we need to be able to see that the evidence is available and be able to interrogate it. And that's why evaluation and oversight is really important. We think that this should be holistic. We want to join up, as I say, and we would like to see a joining up of technical oversight, pedagogical oversight, and societal oversight, societal outcome oversight. And we really hope that that's something that can come together so the evidence can be united and that we'll find the support that schools and teachers need. So in terms of further research, as Josh mentioned, we're very keen that there's that more research is done. And we outline in the report further areas where we think that there are opportunities. For example, exploring what the outcomes of these technologies are, looking at potentially a standardized framework for oversight and evaluation, considering how teachers and staff are using AI, be it narrow, generative, or general purpose, and evidencing how AI personalized learning models are actually making decisions about pupils and then the impact that they're having. This report, this presentation is not definitive. It's a snapshot, it's an overview, it's a landscape, it's just the start. But we really hope that it proves to generate some interest and that of all the things from the report, I really hope that those of you that read it, use it to scribble your own ideas in the margins and use it as an inspiration for further thinking. So thank you very much. If anyone wants to chat with me about it, you're very welcome to. But I think we should hear from the panel and their thoughts about the report and where we're going in the future. Thanks very much. Can I invite you onto the platform?
Well, good afternoon and welcome to this panel discussion, and thank you very much for Renata for a great report and for the introduction. We're going to be talking up here for about 30 minutes about the report itself and the responses to it, and then I'm very keen to hear from all the voices in the room and online for the rest of the session as well. So to introduce my panel, on my immediate left we have Bridie Tuha, who is the Deputy Director of Digital Strategy at the Department for Education. We then have Melanie Ranaudan, who is the Chief Executive of the National Institute of Teaching, Dr. Rajeshwari Iyer, who is the co-founder and CEO of Synaptic. So we've challenged all of our three speakers to come up with a 5-minute or so response to the report itself, and then I'm actually going to give Renata a chance to respond to the responders. But Bridie.
Thank you. Does this work? The biggest challenge. Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for your work on the report. It's excellent, and I think a learning curve is a really appropriate title because I think that is really what we're all on. I've got a few reflections on things that I think really do neatly align with the stuff we're doing. So I think the complexity of the situation we're in, and the fact that everything is still evolving. Josh, you talked about the pace of technology versus the speed of uptake, the uniqueness of the set of challenges that generative AI presents, and that poses a challenge for government, and where do we focus our efforts? And I think, that would be a bit of the theme, I think, of the things we say is where do we focus and where should we prioritise? This government is recognising the potential for technology and AI. We've seen that in recent weeks in the AI Opportunities Action Plan announcement. There's a blueprint for a modern digital government, which is out, and our Secretary of State did a really sort of positive speech about technology at BET a couple of weeks ago, where she talked about modernising education with technology, I think that really sets out where she's at, and actually the chance for government to be taking a more proactive approach in this space, which is great. And she announced some new work that we've started, which does align with the themes in the report. So we published a safety framework for edtech companies. If you're selling into schools, please look at how you align with this framework. At the moment, that's just guidance, but we'll think about then how do we evolve that over time. Then we also announced the EdTech Evidence Board. So we very much recognise those challenges about evidence and how do schools and colleges know what to buy. The market is really hard to navigate, and actually that 3-year RCT, the Education Endowment Foundation has done such great work, as someone mentioned, but actually does that work for technology, and how do we evolve that? So the education evidence, the evidence board, the EVE, sorry, as we've been calling it for short, but the that is looking at the, what criteria should we set for testing the kind of efficacy of technology for teaching and learning. I'm really pleased we've now got a contractor, the Chartered College of Teaching has been appointed to lead that work as the kind of first phase. So, that isn't going to solve all the problems straight away, but, we've started, which is great. Also, teacher capability to use technology. We announced we're producing some training materials so that teachers can start to use those materials for upskilling in terms of how they're using AI. And I think one of the things which came up in one of your key points is about the government focus on the opportunities and the risks, and where do we balance our kind of efforts across that. And I think there's this, some people really want us to focus on managing the risks and how do you do that, and others really want us to say, well, look, there's all these opportunities and how do you, shouldn't you be pushing those? So I think we're, I'm here to learn, and your thoughts on how do we balance that and how do we straddle that right. But I think across the areas, the things that we announced a couple of weeks ago, I think we're trying to look at both of those and move forward on both. I guess one thing I wanted to mention that maybe didn't come up so much in the report, but the focus of most of our work for the last few years has been on the kind of underpinning core technology infrastructure, and recognising that actually if a school doesn't have Wi-Fi in every classroom, actually you can't send students the support that a technology might be able to offer. So quite a lot of our work over the last sort of 3 years has been on getting that in place, and we'll continue to kind of fight for that across government so that we get the funding for that. The other one maybe is about data interoperability and data capability, because I think using some of the narrow AI examples around predictive analytics requires that kind of capability and join up around data that I think perhaps isn't there. So we're also thinking about that. But then, to end on, I think the research questions, hugely valuable to set all of that out, really recognise those as areas that need more thought. Where do we start with the big challenges for education, some of which were called out, versus the sort of what impact does technology have on brain development? And there's a huge range of questions there, and would love the academic community to be working with us on what how do we answer some of those.
Great, thank you very much for that. I always love the fact that every research report calls for more research. But Melanie, can you tell us from the perspective of the National Institute of Teachers, how you view the report?
Yes, of course, thank you. Hello everyone. National Institute of Teaching, if you haven't come across us before, we're a national institute set up by a group of schools. We focus on teacher development, so we're training teachers and leaders, but we're also carrying out research into teacher development as well. So bringing those two things together to really create a teacher education laboratory. And focused on serving the most disadvantaged communities as well. So as you might expect, we are curious about, but also confronted by AI in all parts of our work, and these sort of concentric circles of the way AI is being experienced and used by children, by teachers in teaching those children, by teacher educators in teaching the teachers, and then by researchers, including us, in thinking about how we're researching, how we're teaching the teachers, and every other stage of the concentric circle it's an opportunity. It's impossible to ignore. We certainly don't know all the answers, of course, like I think probably most of us in the room, and so particularly welcome the move that Nuffield and the Ada Lovelace Institute have made here in bringing this together as a really, I think, important baseline for us, and asking what feels to me like really the right questions. So I'll try not to repeat the things that we've heard both from Josh and Renata. I'll see how I get on. We are clearly seeing an increase in the use of AI at all those stages of the concentric circles. So this morning I was in Peckham with our London cohort of trainee teachers, and we had already heard from them that over half were using AI weekly in their teacher practice. And these are trainee teachers who have only been learning to teach for 4 months or so. And in my very unscientific sample of them this morning, it sounded to me like it had increased even since we asked that question. So it is already happening. New teachers are learning how to teach using AI weekly, probably daily, in their teaching practice. And then sort of at every other stage of the school system, we also train CEOs of multi-academy trusts, and we're seeing the first posts coming into groups of schools for directors of AI, for example, and that the question of how do you effectively lead AI strategy across a group of schools is one that is really coming through strongly from school leadership at CEO level and sort of every level in between as well. So the kind of usage, but also the demand for support and information and guidance is increasing and very strong. 5 quick points if I can. So the first one, I think, sort of reflecting where we come from, but I mean, I did hear it come through in the contributions we've already had this morning, is we absolutely have to start with children here. We have to work back from what is the outcome that we want to have from children, closely followed by teachers. So conversations about this need to have teachers in the room, and I was sort of half tempted to pluck a trainee teacher out of their learning how to teach this morning and bring them with us, because we need to have teachers in this conversation if we're going to deliver the best impact for children. They've got to be active participants and not held at arm's length until we're ready for them to be marketed to. So children first, led by teachers. Totally agree in terms of the Matthews effect here, Josh, the potential for the Matthews effect. And I go slightly further and say we should probably just start with an assumption that the impact here is going to benefit those who are already advantaged and disadvantage those who face the greatest challenges. And just start there and then work out how we try and design that effect out of our reactions here. Because certainly that's what we've seen over and over again, the sort of inverse equity hypothesis suggesting that it is going to be those children, those teachers and those schools and communities that already have the greatest hurdles to overcome that are going to, the benefits, if there are sufficient significant benefits, are going to reach them last and probably most weakly. So I think we have to be really relentless in asking ourselves that question and forcing ourselves to design round that challenge. I think we have to think really expansively and critically about where we see bright spots, and there clearly are bright spots. And I sort of got in my preparation, I was like, oh, I'm all doom and gloom at this point. I mean, there definitely are some bright spots here, but I think we have to sort of deploy sort of systems thinking. We have to zoom out. We have to not only think about the very specific effects of interventions within quite a narrow casting of the system. We have to think about downstream consequences, unintended consequences as well in all of this. But we do see bright spots. I mean, the EEF trial recently looking at resource and lesson preparation in Key Stage 3 science, a time saving of 30% with no discernible impact on quality is potentially really significant. So taking those bright spots and then applying that real criticality and kind of systems thinking there so we can try and maximise the potential positive benefits, I think is very important. Big question about what all this means for teaching and learning. Where goes pedagogy in a world of AI? I mean, I can't even get into that, so we'll sort of skip over it and we'll come back to that later probably. But just your point, I think, is really well made about, for example, lesson planning, which is one of the things, obviously, Oak have made a start thinking about a really effective lesson planning tool, also the EEF work there as well. What does that now mean about when the right time, the right way to teach a teacher to plan lessons is? You could say you need to have that work done upfront so that they've got the mental models so that they can critically evaluate the products of AI tools. But a teacher who has already left the profession because their workload feels unsustainable in the first few years as they're trying to plan all those lessons is not going to have time to hone their professional practice. So there are some trade-offs to be balanced there. Final point, The echo back to vector I thought was interesting, and to bring in another lesson from history. Many years ago, as a young new civil servant, I spent a lot of hours handing out CD-ROMs as part of the New Opportunity Fund, which some of you might remember. This was in about 97, 98. Spent 280 million training 80% of teachers in the use of what we then called information communications technology. And if I can just read a couple of sentences from the evaluation, a key issue was the significance of school culture and leaders' attitudes towards ICT. No progress could be made unless the professional vision was agreed within the school. I feel like this is all a glimpse into the future, potentially, of what we could see. So attention to school culture and school leadership, I think, is really important here as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Melanie. Do you think it would be a good idea to recreate vector, given you have all been mentioning it?
I don't know whether a Quango is the right vehicle, I don't know, but I think the call for governance and oversight, I absolutely agree with you.
Okay, Rajeshwari, first of all, could you just tell us briefly about Synaptic, just to explain to everyone in the room what you do, and then your response to the report?
Of course. So I'm one of the founders of a company called Synaptic. We've developed from scratch an AI model trained completely with UK-specific training data to help teachers with their marking, feedback, and analytics. So just to give some background, the pain point that we're trying to solve is teachers spend hours and hours marking student work, equal amount of time trying to give high quality feedback, and an equal amount of time analyzing all of their marking to derive outcomes and understand where the students are at their learning journey. So we're hoping that with this AI tool, we'll be able to automate or semi-automate some of the aspects of that. Thank you so much for having me. Very often in policy level discussions, tech providers actually do not get invited to the table. So I think it was a great idea to have us here. I've digested the report a couple of times. And obviously I'm bringing an tech provider's perspective to the table. And the first thing I think that really struck to me was you've not made any assumptions about the level of AI literacy of the reader, which is fantastic because that is the ground truth. We work with educators, not just within the K-12 sector, but also in the TVET sector and beyond. And the truth is that most people, educators and students actually think that AI is equal to ChatGPT. And that is not true, I'm afraid. Narrow AI, we've covered all of that. So that is the reality of AI, and not just in education, but actually in healthcare, in finance, across sectors. So well done on that. For me, there were two things that I really wanted to touch upon from a developer's perspective, which is data and the whole, I'd say, fluff around personalization. Yes, it might happen, but it's not going to happen soon. That's the reality. So just to share about what we had to go through when we were developing this tool, because we decided this was pre-ChatGPT, but OpenAI did exist. It's been around for 8-9 years. Mm-hmm. We set out to solve a problem for teachers, which is help them to mark and help them to move away from multiple choice questions, because that has its own limitations, and we won't get into that. So 4 years ago, when we started this, my co-founder is a science teacher. She's been so for 16 years in the UK, mostly boys' schools, quite disadvantaged backgrounds. And she's felt the pain from a teacher, but also from a student's perspective. So it was a very specific problem that we wanted to solve. And by solving the problem of marking, we are also solving the problem of giving high quality feedback to students. And sorry, I lost my train of thought looking at you. And we had to firstly educate our stakeholders, so students, teachers, parents, that we have this idea AI/computer can do this for you. At that time, nobody knew about ChatGPT. And because we're building this model, we need access to high quality data so that when the AI model marks, it marks as accurately as possible, or actually better than what regular teachers can. And so it was very hard, because this kind of data, I mean, the report touches on, make sure that you're training your model with education-specific data, but actually that kind of data doesn't exist. The DFE is now taking steps to make education-specific data available. But that content store, although it's great, to my company, it's actually of no use, because we need assessment data. We need high-quality exam questions. We need highly moderated, marked student responses to train the model with, so that when a new answer comes in for that kind of question, it marks with a very, very high accuracy. So when we started out, this was the biggest hurdle we had. We did not have access to data. So we had to educate teachers, schools that we reached out to, who helped us to gather that kind of data. As you can imagine, we had a lot of hoops to jump through before we could get that access. Again, it's not readily available. We went to exam boards. We were not known. It was two women, one academic, one school teacher, saying, hey, we have this idea. Can we have access to high stakes examinations papers? And it was obviously it was closed door. So data was a massive problem. It still is. So it is incredibly hard for tech providers to build models that are based on education-specific data. I have come from a clinical background as well. I was in the NHS. While the NHS is a lot more regulated than education, access to data is actually still quite easy, because you're working within the realms of NHS, and you can go and ask your departments to. And so although there's a lot of regulatory hoops to pass through, data is accessible, and therefore medtech has actually advanced at a much faster pace than edtech. I'm going to jump to personalization. I think we all have very high hopes for AI to help with personalization, flipped classroom. Knowledge will be taken care of outside of the classroom, but teachers can focus on more pastoral, and I think the ideas are great, and yes, it might happen, but it's not going to happen soon, because every edtech product is just doing their own things in silos. For example, we've built this fancy model. It does the marking, it gives feedback, and what it can do to personalize learning is personalize perhaps the next question that a learner gets, or an entire assessment that a learner has to get through, based on the performance of the answers on previous questions and previous assessments. So that's the extent of personalization that we can do. When AI's true potential will be reached is when edtech products are working with each other, and there's deep cross-product integration. There's longitudinal data available, which means for an individual learner, there's years and years of data that we've been following, and that can be fed into a predictor model. We need multimodal data. So for a particular student, all of the different ways in which they're learning, it could be text, it could be audio, it could be watching videos. And you're sort of monitoring that and following that for years and years. That's when you can truly personalize learning for an individual based on their ability, based on their likes and wants of how they want to learn, which it's impossible to do. EdTech products don't talk to each other. It's close to impossible to get anybody else's data. So yeah, that's sort of my take on.
Great, thank you very much for that. Renata, did you want to come back on any of the points?
I mean, very briefly, isn't this fabulous? This is exactly when I was like in the report talking about working holistically. I mean, just hearing all three responses, and getting to hear them in the same room at the same time. That's the critical thing. My key takeaways, I'm very amused about the CD-ROM. I spent way too long, good day reading about gripes about CD-ROMs when they came out, and oh, this is going to replace teaching and it mustn't happen, and then thinking about the trajectory of the CD-ROM and how long that actually lasts for. And I know that's not going to be the case with AI, but it is a really important thing that where we are right now, and as your comments have just pointed out, where we're at right now is the start. We don't know really how great or terrible this is. We've got lots of views about it. It's amazing and it's awful. So the critical point that I think has been made is, what's the purpose? What do we want this to do? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? And then what does good look like of that? And hearing all three of you speak about that, I think is giving a lot of food for thought as to what good looks like. And also where, as I said in the presentation, where we shouldn't proceed and where we absolutely should. And if personalized learning feels like the amazing opportunity, but really it's one part of a much broader way of teaching, then let's not put all of our attentions there, but let's think about ways that we can ensure everybody is able to do their jobs efficiently and learn efficiently.
Great. I'm going to dive into 3 areas that really interest me, and then I'm going to open it up to discussion from the floor. But Brady, if I could come back to you, you referenced the speech that Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson gave last month. And I read it and was very struck by how upbeat it was. She was talking about the role of technology in education and said, I see far more opportunities to be gained than lost, far more benefits than costs, far more hope than fear. You might have written that part of this section. But she also kind of preempted, I think, part of the report, which was about this need for evaluation and oversight. And you referenced, as she did, the kind of EdTech Evidence Board. She was also talking about something called "and technology for your school" in the speech as well. Can you tell us more about that? How are you going to address this need that Renata talked about for evaluation of EdTech models that can really help teachers evaluate between one and the other?
Yep. Yes, thank you. We also obviously have special advisors in the department who do contribute to these features. So we're, yeah, we. I think it was really positive. And so the Plan Technology tool is a digital service, and that links to the point I was making about getting your core infrastructure right. So that's kind of aimed at the schools which are like, I'm hearing about this technology thing, I don't really know where to start. You know, I've got a technology provider that comes in one day a week to fix my printers, but actually, you know, what else do I hear? There's opportunities here. How do I do it? And so it's a self-service kind of digital tool. So you can look at, actually, is my broadband connection strong enough if I then want Wi-Fi in all my classrooms? You know, help you with sort of the practicalities of trying to get your tech right. Because I think back to that point of, I think part of our role has to be that making sure everyone has the opportunities for technology. So the Plan Tech tool is out there. Please go and try it or recommend it to your teacher friends, leader friends. And yes, so that we hope will solve, you know, partially solve one kind of challenge that the sector's facing. But yes, then the kind of which software products to buy, I think, is the one which is the sort of where the evidence gap is, and what the EdTech Evidence Board is looking to do. So in this first phase, it's looking to set some criteria for what for how you would assess like the effectiveness of a technology tool, and consult with the market around that. And there's an advisory board that's going to work with the board, or sort of an advisory group. And so, you know, looking at that criteria, we'll draw on some of the things which have been done internationally, which are mentioned in the report, and work with experts on, you know, what does that look like? We're working with the EEF, who I know are here, and, you know, I hope that is the start of us being able to do more to address that challenge.
Great. Okay. Melanie, you raised this incredibly important issue of the digital divide. And there had been a feeling, I think, I mean, during COVID, there was a lot of effort put into kind of digitizing education, handing out computers to schools. And there was this belief that if that momentum could be maintained afterwards, that there would be a narrowing, perhaps, of the digital divide. But as you say, there's now a risk that it could broaden again, because the privileged students and pupils will get access to these good tools, and we might see a further divergence. How do we tackle that?
Well, I think it's a question of equity and equality, isn't it? Partly. So we've touched on a few times, haven't we, about sort of the easy way to respond to these sorts of moments is to push information and resources out equally to all schools. So and you can see why, because it's a sort of easier intervention to say, let's go for treating all schools the same, we'll make equal provision, and then you've got a sort of universality. You know what schools are entitled to, able to access, as it's easier to plan and deliver. The problem with that, of course, is it doesn't necessarily lead to equal outcomes for children, because of the circumstances and the context in the schools in which those children are being educated. And so that then suggests you need to think about how you tilt your response so that you're starting from, how do we get to equal outcomes for children rather than equal provision to schools? That is sort of in its nature harder, I would say, to do, because then you've got to think about differentiated responses and prioritising those parts of the system where you think there is going to be a need for greater levels of support. I do think it's more than digital divide as well. I mean, it definitely is digital divide, and what Bridie's talking about is really important. But actually, I think it was some of your team, certainly some of your colleagues, Bridie, and some of my team went to do some sort of conversations out with schools, and the reality of what the sort of digital infrastructure within many schools is like, it's really miles away from where it needs to be able to implement the sort of tools we're talking about, kind of AI tools, properly. And I think it's sort of seductive to assume that there is pretty consistent, pretty robust digital infrastructure out there in schools, and it's just not the case. So certainly there is a digital divide issue, I think, but there's also a sort of school leadership capacity, attention issue. There's the impacts of child poverty and how those then are felt within schools, all of which is competing for limited resources. So even if you, through your tools, know what the steps are ideally you would be able to take to close that divide, that doesn't mean you're necessarily in a position as a school, either because of leadership priorities or because of the limited resources that you have to actually do something about that. And that's before you get into developing the teachers and leaders to be able to respond effectively to the opportunities of AI. So there are big challenges there, but I think what we have to do is start from saying, how can we ensure that we get equitable outcomes for children rather than equal access for schools?
Right. Okay. Rajeshwari, we've been talking about how AI is disrupting education. One thing it's definitely disrupting is EdTech. There had been a kind of surge of investment into EdTech during the pandemic and the lockdown, as people were thinking the future is all digital. But I was very struck reading an article in the FT at the end of last year, which showed that VC investment in EdTech companies had fallen from about 17.3 billion in 2023 to 3 billion last year, a real retrenchment. And I think part of the reason for that is because a lot of people now are concerned about how will general purpose AI disrupt the existing EdTech models. And a lot of students and teachers are now going online and using those models direct themselves rather than actually using EdTech tools. So how do you see the industry emerging from this period of disruption that it is itself facing?
Yeah, also I think the sharp sort of fall could also be attributed to the Chinese government sort of closing the market completely. But yes, I think it's very, very hard now for EdTech providers to show differentiation. If everybody is building an application layer or an app on top of just essentially, two models that are doing well what they're meant to do in terms of, I'm completely only referring to ChatGPT and Anthropic, just, putting it out there. These are large language models and most people are using that. So how are they going to differentiate? Ultimately, to be honest, I think the way providers develop tools is you fixate on a problem that you're trying to solve and then you solve it. And actually, to be honest, teachers don't care what's in the underlying, like yes, some curious teachers ask us, oh my God, how does the computer mark my answers for me? But otherwise, they're just happy that there is a tool that's solving a problem, and it's doing it sometimes actually much better than they would be able to do. So, sorry, that's a bit of a digress, but yes, I think investment-wise, it is very hard as a startup building an AI tool to go over the hype, to stand out. We have to educate a lot of investors on, what actually we're not building a wrapper on top of ChatGPT. It's very much very education specific, very assessment specific, and so on. So it's the technology itself is an asset to the company, whereas, however, there is a little catch, just because how VC funds work. They do have to return their fund, in a certain amount of time. So if there's been a lull for sort of 2 to 3 years, then people will start to deploy. And just because of the fact that education is a hot sector, and it is, of very sort of strategic importance to the government as well, I am quite hopeful. I mean, we're going into a funding round, so we'll see how it goes. I don't want to put my foot where my mouth is, but I am hoping that we, just as a company, will stand out just because of what we are building, but also we can show, it all goes back to some of the things that we've discussed already, evidence-backed and, user feedback and so on. If we can show that, yes, it's being adopted by lots of people, and they're having efficiency gains, they're having improvements in outcomes and so on, I think we will see that tide turn. In general, I think maybe if we looked at EdTech-focused VC funding, then the scenario is slightly different. But if you look sort of across the sector, activity is still quite robust. There is a lot of funding going into tech companies. It's just because ROI is so hard. Within the UK, it's very hard to sell to schools. So, there are lots and lots of reasons why funding-wise, it is a dull climate.
Good luck with your funding round.
Thank you.
Now, questions from the room, and we also have questions online, which Josh is going to channel. So, yes, the lady here. Could you just wait for the microphone? Please say who you are, where you're from, and if you could keep your question or comment relatively brief.
Okay, Samantha Hen, UCL. So there's a 2021 paper commissioned by UNESCO from Selwyn and Fassett that kind of warns against kind of false optimism, given that there is no evidence of EdTech having impact. So given that, how do we avoid the false optimism whilst maintaining what we want to maintain, given recently all the companies that produce the base transformer models have dropped their DEI policies and are rolling back their responsible AI documentation as well? So how do we actually get to where we want to get in a meaningful way, given the current context?
Good question. Who would like to answer that one?
I could start. I think that's absolutely, really good point. And I think that links to lots of the things in the report, doesn't it, about the kind of balancing the risks and the opportunities. And I think we, in government, I think what's, I go to the very small number of schools that are doing lots of things with technology, and you're like, wow, there are some places where this is really being embedded in the pedagogy, in the sort of whole school approach. It's sort of solving challenges, and then we know there's a whole tranche of the sector that hasn't got that at all. And so I think it's that trade-off between the kind of the risks and the we know this is happening in the sector. Lots of people are saying it is helping, sometimes that's anecdotal, but actually how do we, so I think what we're trying to do through the evidence board and the sort of policy thinking we're doing is how do we find out what things are going to have a positive impact while managing those risks.
And I think there's something in what Josh was saying earlier on about us having to think about how we're generating evidence here as well, and thinking about the methods that we can deploy that are going to give us the sufficiently rapid outputs that are going to inform our choices, be robust enough given all the things we talked about in terms of ethics and safety and risk, but move quickly enough to keep pace with the developments here? I mean, I don't have the answers to that now, but I think it feels to me it's absolutely the right questions, and I'm sure the people in the room are the right people to work out what the right response is. But yeah, thinking about how we can be sufficiently nimble in our research methods to respond to the challenge here, I think is really important.
Okay, I had a question here.
Hello, Teresa Williams from the Department of Education at Oxford University, work in the Rees Centre, which focuses on educational outcomes and engagement of children in the social care system in particular. Really, it's partly a kind of comment, really, and a response to your question, Bridie, about what should government be doing. And my hope is that listening to all of you, and thank you, the report is great, is really about, this is a system, and it's one, we've talked about we in the room, but I don't know who we is, and I think there are different we's with different competing interests. So my hope for government is that you are the place where you think about the balance, and it's neither hooray, let's do it all, or nor is it, oh my God, it's all going to go disastrously wrong. And I suppose what I'm looking for is, you've got the evidence board that you talked about, who's on it, is the right range of disciplines involved in it, so that it's not just tech and it's not just science, it's also ethics, behavioural, social science and so on, and thinking particularly about the children that I'm interested in, who are the least advantaged. To that vein, sort of thinking about infrastructure not just being about tech, but also being about skills and the kind of behaviours, and particularly thinking about relational practice in classrooms alongside the use of tech. And third, I suppose, tools for deciding. So if we're going to have balance that's around how do we trade off the advantages and disadvantages, I don't want what questions about tools for what software should I buy, but do I need software for what purpose it's I suppose that's what I'm looking for government uniquely to do as sort of custodians of the system for all of us. So hope that's helpful, and if you could just do that by tomorrow.
Write that down.
Would you like to come back on that? On who is we?
Yeah, I think that's really, yes, I think that's a great question, great comment. We're absolutely thinking about the ethics around all of this and making sure they've got the right representation. I can't talk about exactly who's on the evidence advisory group yet, but taking all of that on board. So thank you.
Can you wait just a minute for the microphone so people can hear?
Sorry, Lizzie works for me, but just to say we're scoping who that list is. So yeah.
Okay, great. There's a question here.
Hi, thank you. Fascinating discussion today. There's been some really important points about centering outcomes for the child throughout all of this. And I appreciate this is, and all the circles of support around the child that go from there. I appreciate it's about education, but I've just not heard much about parents and parenting. And I'd just be really interested in the panel's view on how parents and parenting fit into the recommendation, given their critical influence both for the child, but also for the culture that's been spoken of, and all sorts of other aspects as well.
Very interesting subject. Who would like to take that on?
I don't mind, actually. Just as part of the process of, understanding user perspectives on how students will respond to if they know that their work is being marked by AI. How would parents respond to that? And of course, how teachers, we know that teachers are quite happy with the idea. We did do focus groups. We spoke with parents of, students who were involved in the initial sort of stages. And I think all that parents need, it was a very small sample, full transparency, a few, you can count them on in my fingertips. I think what they want for I'm a parent as well. I think what they want for their children is that teachers are spending time with them. And so if AI can take, or any edtech tool or technology can take away some of the, administrative and repetitive burden that they've got to deal with in their working hours, and instead focus on what their child needs, parents are happy. I think the crucial bit is we need to understand how teachers are actually spending that time, which I think we touched upon during the presentation. What are teachers going to do with this extra time that they will suddenly have with, no marking to do or no administrative, no behavior stuff to think about. How are you going to use that time? We don't know yet. We've not done that kind of survey with the schools that we work with. But I think that will have the repercussions, and it'll lead to some of the long-term benefits that we are hoping to see. Again, it's too soon, I think, to ask these questions because.
Okay, Renata, do you have any views on this, or is this a subject for more research?
I mean, yeah, exactly. More research needed. I think there's an interesting thing we talked a lot about data. Data underpins all of this. We are, I think, slightly data exhausted now. We are all digital citizens. We are giving our data away. We're making decisions about our data all the time, and we're kind of exhausted with that. Within schools, if we're going to start to collect more data or be using data to direct travel for pupils and students, involving students in the decisions of where their data is going and how it's going to be used is really critical. Historically, some schools haven't been brilliant at that. It's been a case of you have to, not you have a choice to. Increasingly, choice is taken away. Involving parents in that is also important, but there is an exhaustion with it. We've talked a lot about collecting more data in order to get better insights or to be able to personalize. What does that actually mean? And should that actually be the case is a really important question. The more nuanced, the more detailed the data is about pupils. It's one thing to have data about outcomes. It's another thing to have the data about the pupils on their journey. We need to have a very serious conversation about that too, because we don't know where data is going in terms of training AI systems. Now, that's going to be, again, I use the word holistic. It's a conversation for everybody. It's a conversation that should involve parents, pupils, teachers, tech, policy, academia as a whole.
Okay, Josh, do we have questions online?
Yeah, I'm going to try and combine two questions here. There was one really interesting one from Parama Chowdhury, who comes from a higher education perspective and talks about how in her university they've been preparing students for an AI-oriented world and thinking about the sort of curriculum in the higher education sense. And the question is, what can schools do in a similar way to think about their students? And somebody else has actually also asked about AI literacy training being centralized perhaps through National Institute of Teaching. I don't think that's quite what you do, but and whether there are any plans or insights on how that could be coordinated for teachers. So I think those two are in the same sort of territory, and I can imagine interesting answers from everyone on those. You want to start, Melanie?
Yes, if I start with the second part, if that's okay. So we're sort of asking ourselves that question, and we can't not work with our trainee teachers, our new teachers who are in their first years of teaching, and actually those people who are leading in schools about these questions. They're asking the questions, and we need to provide them with some sort of answer. So the work that the DFE is commissioned and is working on quickly to provide some guidance that says, here's what great training will look like by the Chartered College of Teaching, isn't it? I think is going to be really valuable at providing a sort of at least a start of 10 answer to that question for all levels of sort of teacher preparation and leadership. So we eagerly await those materials coming out, which I think is only a couple of months or so away, isn't it? So that is good. Inevitably, it is only going to be a start of a 10 because it's going to keep moving forward, and we and others who are involved in training new teachers are going to have to be continually restless, aren't we, about keeping pace with the changes that are happening. This question about sort of criticality, it's sort of come up a few times now about how can we prepare teachers to be asking the right questions before they're embarking on utilising AI, I think is very much where we see our role particularly. So providing information, drawing attention to questions of ethics, of safety, including safeguarding. And by the way, what I'm hearing from schools in terms of increasing cases of safeguarding caused by the introduction of AI tools into classrooms, I think is something we really are going to have to pay careful attention to. So we have to draw attention to ethics and safeguarding and all aspects of safety around this. And then we have to teach them to to approach this all with criticality, to think about the system within which they're operating, and to make judicious choices then about the use of AI. I mean, it's sort of the same as when we're thinking about the existing edtech in classrooms, is we generally don't teach them to use particular products because we don't know what they're going to encounter when they go out into their schools. We need to give them the knowledge and the skills to be adaptable, to respond to both the school context they find them in, the needs of the particular learners they're working with, and the school's policies, systems, and tools and so on. And that's the approach that we're going to take.
Okay. And Brady, could I get you to answer the question about the further education?
Yeah, on the curriculum, I can't say much more on curriculum because the curriculum review is happening at the moment, and I think the interim report is due to be published at some point soonish. So I know they're looking at that question through that curriculum review, but I can't really say any more on that at the moment.
Okay.
I just wanted to add one point to just with our experience working with schools, there has been a big increase in DPIA forms coming through, and teachers in general being a lot more thorough with the process of signing that final check and then getting onboarded. So 100%, something's happening that it is getting a lot better in just the 2 years that we've been in the market.
Yeah. Question here.
Hi, I'm Sue Atwell from JISC. I got a kind of two-parter. I think obviously the report's very focused on schools, but there's been a lot of good work that's happening with colleges and universities, and how the learning from that is going to play into schools. I'd be quite interested in, because I think there is a lot that can be learned and some journeys that can be saved. And the second part is that we take information from colleges and universities as well as providing it. And one of the big gaps that we're finding, and it's coming from both the student and the staff front, is around information literacy, which is becoming, a vital skill rather than an academic skill. And the fact that we don't, as a nation, we don't teach this at school level traditionally, and it's hampering the development at college and university level. So there's a big gap. And sorry, it's a bit of a pattern as well. So yeah.
Renata, do you want to answer the first part and Melanie the second?
If I understand about information literacy, I think literacy is a really interesting thing, full stop. We've been on a bit of a journey where 15 years ago, you'd sit in a room like this, and if you're talking about data and AI and digital and tech and all the rest of it, you'd explain it all and you'd see ripples across everyone's faces of, oh, it's that. Then about 10 years ago, you'd try and do that, and everybody in the room would be like, yeah, no, we know, and here's our insights. But we seem to have come back round again. Like, we've all got a good basic understanding, but in actual fact, our literacy in this space is now very wobbly, which is some of what we're trying to achieve in the report about explain different types of AI. It's complicated. It would be worrying if literacy was taught about how to write a good prompt. Like, if we were to go down that path, we're already sort of giving ourselves up to the fact that AI is going to do everything for us, so we just now need to know how to write the right prompt for it. I think there's a thing about, I had learning about, learning with, and learning from, but it's actually teaching about, teaching with the technology, and teaching from, and whether there's a question mark as to how detailed we go into that. Literacy is a really important thing. I mean, if we think about it, maybe all of us use maximum of 20 websites, 10 apps, something along those lines. Like, how diverse actually is our engagement with the online world, with AI? Where do we think we know it all and actually we know very little? And how might we be having the wool pulled over our eyes? So what does that mean for literacy? Like, what is it we actually do need to know? Okay. I hope it was an interesting answer to another question. No, please.
Could you take the mic, please?
Sorry. The point about information literacy and AI, it's about that, having that critical thinking about understanding whether a source is robust, whether information is right. And, we can see evidence of this. If we look back to when we had COVID, we can see evidence of poor information literacy, with people believing something they read on Facebook was more valid than something that was coming out of government sources, for example. It is a skill. It is a skill that we all increasingly need. It's a skill we don't actually teach, never mind effectively, to be honest. And that's the part I was coming at, that is the gap.
I don't disagree at all. I think you're absolutely right. With increasing deep fakes and outputs or generative AI outputs that we can't tell whether fact from fiction. Yes, I mean, I think this is a huge problem. One I don't have an answer to, unfortunately.
So I disagree a bit in that. A bit of disagreement is always good.
Yeah.
I disagree a bit in that. I do think actually what we do train new teachers, like criticality is really important in our training for new teachers. Okay, and so they are also going to be passing on that approach to criticality to their students. Now, obviously, as Bradley said, this curriculum and assessment review is ongoing, and so there's going to be big thoughts going on in that space about the future of the curriculum. But criticality is so central to the way that we're training teachers, and then it is also central to the teaching of many subjects and the way that we're teaching students as well. And just going back to your other point, actually, so hello, JISC. We are working with JISC, really value our partnership emerging partnership with JISC. I think it's such a good point about trying to break down the barriers between schools, education, further education, higher education. These are all these artificial divides, really, aren't they? And actually, there's so much we can learn from each other. And actually, going back to a previous point, also from healthcare, NHS as well. The point you were making earlier on about data, actually. So we are doing a research project generously funded by the Nuffield Foundation, which is connecting up teacher workforce inputs. So teacher workforce, and then the way that they have been prepared for their teaching careers, the way they've been trained during their teaching careers, with pupil attainment data. And one of the things, we're working with Oxford University on that. They've done a lot of work in the healthcare space on primary care data. And one of the things that has been really interesting in that is your point you were making about actually that sort of data management in healthcare and across the NHS, despite various NHS trusts and all the complexities we know of and limitations in the NHS, is actually, it works much better than in schools, where we've got vast amounts of data, but it's incredibly fragmented. It exists in sort of a million different places, and so we're not really utilising the resources that potentially we've got at our disposal there for the purposes of improving outcomes for children. So that's the piece of work we're going to be doing over the next sort of 4 years or so, including using AI as part of our research, within our research methods, at looking at things like lesson transcripts and mentoring conversations as well. So yeah, boundaries between healthcare, FE, HE, schools, we need to reach across them. I definitely agree.
Josh, are there any more questions?
Well, there's a really good comment that's come through the chat on AI literacy, which is a shout out to school librarians, who of course are responsible for teaching information and digital literacy skills and keep up to speed with technological advances. And so they're another player who could be brought into some of the discussion, even though we know that funding in that area within schools is quite tight, but an evolving role for school librarians is certainly something to think about. I want to bring in another question on a completely different topic that's come in from Julia Adamson, which is about this kind of marketplace and demand stimulation, whether the advances in the areas that we've been talking about have been sufficient to generate universal demand prioritization and investment among schools, and whether, if not, whether there might be scope for some incentivizing or I guess subsidy to consider when it comes to supporting schools. I mean, I think it's a question for the panel. It'll be interesting to Bridie's view on that, but more generally, whether you think that's necessary or even sufficient.
Yeah, really good question. And I think that kind of, we have got an edtech market which is fairly free, and but at the same time have quite a difficult market to, as you mentioned, to sell into, because you've got 22,000 sort of unique buyers. I think, despite that, products which are good, I think have done well, and you can see them, and they're in lots of schools. But actually for me, I think it comes back a bit to the evidence. So actually, I think where those products have done well is actually because they've, through word of mouth and anecdotally, schools have found out, oh, this is working somewhere else, and that's got traction. But through the evidence, I think let's start where we're starting now, which is looking at how do we better do evidence around technology, whether ultimately that leads to us needing to do play a greater role in sort of facilitating the functioning of that market? I guess I don't think we're quite there yet to answer that question, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting one as we go down the line. But you'd have reflections on how the market works, but from what I understand, lots of products use the UK as a bit of a sort of training ground almost, and we're going to build our product in English here, try it with some schools, and then actually sort of make their money globally. Whether that's right or not, but there are implications of a more regulated, controlled market versus the market we've got now.
Rajeshwari, do you want to come in on this?
Yes and no, but I will share some thoughts. I think that trend is very much ripe in the UK. You start in the UK, but you sell to British schools abroad because you get, 3x or whatever it might be. The evidence piece is a very, very tricky one. We discussed when, you're a VC-funded startup, there is a very fine balance between where you allocate your funds. It's always sell, so that you're showing traction, you can raise more money. So it's that startup mentality that we've got to have. Otherwise, it's make or break. So it's very, very hard for us to allocate R&D budget to work with schools to provide that evidence. It takes time, basically. It's very hard. I mean, we've not been able to do that. Maybe it's just us, but we've 2 years in the market, we've struggled to just recruit schools to help us to do a study, right? Because they're already stressed. They don't have the time. And we honestly do not have the budget. So universities might play a very crucial role, actually, in helping startups to, hopefully they will play a good role in getting that funding and partner with startups.
Great. We're very nearly out of time. I just want one final quick question to all of you, and how do we accelerate up the learning curve to maximize the potential of this technology or to minimize the downside of the technology? Very short answers from all of you, and I'm going to start with you, Renata.
I mean, I think, as I said, the fact that we're all sat here on this panel having a joint conversation is really important. It's very easy to work in our silos, but to determine what good looks like and to ensure that we can have the opportunities, but we have taken into consideration the challenges, requires all of us to talk to one another and more research.
Great. Rajeshwari.
I think something that keeps me awake in the night, which will hopefully, if we have answers to these questions, we can, go up on the upside, is as a tool developer, AI or not, we really need to think about learning agency and teacher agency. Teaching is a very, very important job. Teachers became teachers because they wanted to teach and they wanted to make a difference in their students' lives and help them achieve their dreams. But if they're using tools, marking is an essential, it's a core part of the teaching journey. But if suddenly the computer is doing that for you, how is that affecting your teaching, the teacher in you, basically? So 2 things as providers we need to be very, very mindful of is what are we doing to the whole concept of having learning agency within the learner, so maintaining that and maintaining teacher agency within the teaching profession.
Okay, great.
Effectively.
Melanie?
I'll go back to the first point I made earlier on, which is we've got to get teachers in the conversation. We've got to get teachers at all stages of their careers. And we've got to be realistic that keeping up with this is a full-time job, even when you're not teaching 22 periods a week. And so we have to find ways to have teachers who can straddle being engaged in this work and remaining in the classroom. One of the most brilliant people in our research team is a teacher of maths and economics 3.5 days a week, and he works in our research team a day and a half. And I think that model, because we've got to recognise we've got to find a way to pay for the time of the practitioners to be in this conversation, we need to find more ways of doing more of that.
Great. Brady?
I mean, Josh, you said at the beginning, is the team underpowered in DFE given the scale of the challenge? And, obviously I would say it is. And, to my superiors, surely we need a bigger team. But I think, it's really positive to come here today after what Bridget Phillipson said 2 weeks ago, I think we are in quite a different place. I think government is keen to, get more involved in this challenge and the risks and the opportunities. So kind of, bear with us, but thank you for all the good work that you're all doing. Invite us to things. I was saying to Raj, it's hard, I get a million emails from small companies saying, can we meet and talk about our product? That's hard for us, but we need to find a better way of, I think, sort of collectively engaging the sector, and we're thinking about all of those things. But if you've got good ideas for what government could and should be doing, always reach out.
Great. So we need more discussion, more agency, more teacher engagement, and a bigger team. So thank you very much to all of the panelists for a fantastic discussion. It's incredibly kind of rich response to a great report. And now I'm going to hand back to Josh. Thanks.
I'm going to be really brief. I've just jotted down a few things I wanted to say at the end. I mean, the first thing, that was an absolutely brilliant discussion, exactly what we try to do here at Nuffield. So thank you very much to everyone for taking part in that. As ever with these things, people think of ideas and things they wanted to say afterwards. We are here for further input, so anyone in the room and anyone online, further thoughts that you've had stimulated by this afternoon, just send them in. Not quite sure where to, but you'll find a way of getting us. Another takeaway I had is about our convening power. I'm really struck by the way that something about the location and our status as an organisation enables a kind of open conversation in a way that is probably easier for all the different stakeholders in this area. So we should probably do more of that, I'm thinking. I'm sparing glares from our events team here. I also wanted to say that we're doing, just give you a bit of a flavour of our own programme of work that we're doing in this area with Ada over the next year. At the moment, we're planning on at least 3 deeper dives into areas, one of them being assessment, another being the role of AI in careers and educational information, advice and guidance, which is an under-researched area. And the third is work that we're planning with the EEF. I think there's some colleagues here around evaluation frameworks, obviously a longer term perspective than coming through at the moment that was talked about earlier. Fourth, I wanted to say we are a research funder, always open to research proposals that touch on some of the themes that you've heard about this afternoon. We have a deadline for outline applications beginning of April and another one in October, I think. So that's open for business on that. And then finally, cake for people who are here rather than, well, maybe people have got their own cake arrangements online, but we have cake and tea and coffee outside, and really hope you can stay for a little bit and talk to us a little bit further. But thanks so much to everyone. And thanks so much to everyone who helped organise this event from the team. I can't name them all, but everything went incredibly smoothly despite the lifts and all that. So thank you so much.